Good morning. We're going to be getting started. How you all doing today? Everybody awake? Everybody got their coffee? I know I got a 2-month-old at home, so I'm kind of awake. But no, my name is Jalil Smith. I'm from Stanton, Virginia. I'm 29 years old. I'm a husband of 4 years. I'm a father of 3 boys, an 11-year-old, a 9-year-old, and a 9-year-old stepson. Can I take this off? And like I said, I have a 2-month-old at home. So just turned 29 in August. I've been at Target Distribution Center for a little bit now. I work weekends. And I'm a felon. I spent 5 years in prison between 18 years old and 24 years old. And I think more than my accomplishments and more than my achievements, that's what's seen the most when looked at me on paper. I did my time in prison. I got out of prison. I got full custody of both of my boys, so they live at home with me full time. So I have a lot to brag about, but probably around a year and a half ago, our house was actually sold from underneath of us. And man, we spent a while trying to find housing, just on the whim. And it was, you need 3 times the rent, and you need 640 and better in credit score. And like I said, at that time I was like 27, 28. I didn't have that. So we ended up living in a hotel, my wife and I and the 3 boys. And mainly because of my felony, right? So I served my time, I paid my debt to society, and then I'm still kind of like blackballed because of a decision I made at 18. And more importantly, less than about myself, more about my kids, right? And my wife and my 9-year-old stepson, who my wife and my 9-year-old stepson was affected by it because we're married and we're tied in together. So now they have to ride this wave of misfortunes with me. And then my own 2 kids, right? They had to suffer along with me because of a choice I made when I was 18, but also because of that choice and of that felony, it made it hard for us to find a place to live. Fast forward a year and a half later, we've been in our apartment for a year now, so things are going good. Like I said, just had a baby, so things are going great. My first daughter. Yeah, thank you. I'm not going to stand up here and ramble because you'll hear from me again later on the panel, but we are going to get into VPM actually came and did an interview with some of us, and we're going to roll my segment of the interview now. More than just words. So it's like you're coming down the Ave, and once you get to that stoplight, once you pass Bessie Weller, you take a left and go up that hill. Almost froze out there.
Do you hear me?
Not yet.
Check, 1, 2, check 1, 2.
Maybe if I turn them up.
Turn up the volume.
I can hear you now.
There you go.
Yeah. I've always loved music. I played the saxophone in band. That was terrible. The song I'm writing now for my album, I said, I don't want war. I just want peace. I'm a felon. I just want my name on the lease. I don't want war, just want peace. I want my name to go on that lease. It ain't no secret, I'm a felon. I'm no longer in them streets. I don't really want to focus on the negative so much, but I do kind of want to give people who hasn't been through it that perspective. That's it. Like most of our lives we spent in a house, in a home. So it's like until that's ripped away, you don't really know how it feels to not have it. Living out the hojo, used to being Superman, but I done lost my mojo. 3 kids to feed, my wife and me, there's no joke. Mama told me this too shall pass, baby, hold on. It's scary not knowing what's about to happen with 3 kids. It got so real that we talked about divorce. Both of us. She came to me and I kind of agreed. Of course, I'm like, no, but like, selflessly, I'm like, you have a child too. Mind you, we don't share any kids together. I have 2 and you have 1. And we're getting told no because of me. And that's leaving you and your son in the cold. When you could easily go somewhere and get an apartment or whatever with you and your son and be good. So like,
It definitely shook our foundation a lot. Just trying to find housing, we almost had to separate as a family. It was bad. I knew that this felony was going to make things harder for me, but I thought that if I rearranged my life and I reconstructed the fabric of who I am, the things would be a little easier for me. No run-ins with the law, no probation violation. So it kind of makes you feel like, where's redemption?
3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9.
Wait, no, you were supposed to go home.
You could have went home, Dad.
Oh.
Dad.
Wait. All right, I'm gonna just stop here at our safety zone.
I can't erase any blemishes, but I use them as a building block. I'm that building block for my children.
What'd you get?
4.
Slide.
2, 3, 4.
Move forward 11 or change places with an opponent.
Not mine, not
Just
mine.
move.
It starts at home. It starts in the home front. But if I don't have a home to teach them, then how can I lead them?
We know that housing stability is actually an underlying indicator for future success for children. Yes, single-family home ownership allows you to build wealth. Stability of housing is what creates opportunity.
We were on a list for this last year. My wife, being the person she is, persistent.
I call her all the time, like all the time, to the point where she kind of knew me before she even met me, because she's like, girl, you call me so much.
We were so ecstatic the day that they called us. They were like, depending on the condition. And I'm like, I don't care about the condition. I'll clean it. I'll clean everything by myself, 100%. I don't need nobody. Just tell me that we can move in.
There's nothing more fulfilling in working with affordable housing than seeing the realization that I'm going to be a homeowner. People don't believe that it's real. When is this going to be taken away from me? This doesn't happen for someone like me. Housing truly is transformational.
This is my own very first place with my name on the lease, and it's mine. And then to add on to that, like, I'm married to somebody and it's hers too.
This is her name. We just found out that she's a girl last week. Found out we were having a girl. I couldn't even focus in the store. I'm like, we gotta get out of here, bro. This is me and my grandfather, us, our kids. It's my best friend's daughter, my niece. So it's not just us on this wall, it's everybody that we care about, everybody that we love. We come from trying to build this family in everybody else's household. And so it means a lot to be here now because it's ours. You know, I can do whatever I want to. I can do backflips 6 times a day here if I wanted to. Like, it's mine.
I think it makes a difference when you have your own space to recharge in. Everything's how you want it to be. And then I also take pride in, like, paying and, like, providing for myself. So it's almost like a sense of peace and happiness.
It still bothers me, you know, because there's a lot of... I'm not the only guy in Stanton, Virginia, or Waynesboro, or Harrisonburg, Virginia, who this has happened to, or who's me and changed and moved on and became better. That's why it still bothers me, because it's like, it might be somebody else like me that's still going through it.
A lot of us don't know anything that we probably should know. The loops, the holes.
I didn't know anything about housing to begin with. I didn't know how to fill out an application for an apartment or a house. I went into prison not knowing this. And so I didn't know what to expect. I just expected freedom. I was just ready to be home. We're still playing catch up on all the stuff that we took a hit on.
Being homeless is what really messed us up. Like, that put us back on our car payment because we did not have it.
It just almost feels like a never-ending cycle of you have to, like, catch up, or you gotta, like, make more money just to, like, have a place to stay.
I almost felt like I was fighting every day just to live. Not just to even try to go out and make the next step happen.
A little pessimistic is a common thing for me right now. We actually made that into the timeout chair. If I had my own apartment, that would fix a lot of my problems, I think. Mentally, definitely mentally. Yeah, just thinking about it makes me hope, for sure.
housing is a human right, so we need to prioritize housing for all.
The human story should highlight why this conversation about affordable housing is a moral and ethical imperative for us as individuals and elected officials and developers to tackle. We always talk about more than houses. It's about opportunity, hope, dignity, change.
It's the faith that you have to have. It's the wanting of knowing that you deserve better. And don't ever be afraid to ask for help either. I think everybody had help at one time or another.
Even if it seems like there's no hope sometimes, like there is, even if it's a little bit.
And then you look back and think about that house you wanted, and you got it.
Well, thank you, Jaleel, for sharing your story. That meant a lot to us. We're happy that you and your family that is continuing to grow has a place that you can call home. And I hope, on a personal note, that you take great pride in the person you've become. You should be very proud of that. We're also grateful to VPM for allowing us to begin with that small portion of their docuseries, Life in the Heartland, which was created and produced by Stanton Company, Deep Structure Productions. So good morning, everyone. My name is Dan Lehman. I'm the CEO of the Community Foundation of the Central Blue Ridge and a member of the planning committee for this summit. We couldn't be happier with the turnout and the interest in this particular topic, so thank you for joining us today. Our committee consists of representatives from Augusta Health, including Dr. Clint Merritt, Crystal Moyers, Gail Schultz, and Tricia Fillion, as well as Lydia Campbell from the Valley Community Services Board, who also represents Valley Homeless Connection, Olivia Rains from the Central Shenandoah Planning District Commission, and Chris Lassiter, my colleague from the Community Foundation. It's been a pleasure and an honor planning this summit with you. Our work together actually began back in March of 2020 as a subcommittee of the then newly formed public-private partnership assembled to respond to the pandemic public health emergency. And when the work of that partnership concluded, our subcommittee forged ahead and shifted our attention from the pandemic to issues of housing and security. And one of our first steps was to begin meeting with and listening to the stories of neighbors in our community who are experiencing housing insecurity, which was the genesis of our traveling exhibit entitled This Is Home, that we worked on in collaboration with our photographer, Kate Simon. Kate, are you here today? There's Kate there. Some samples of the exhibit are in the hallway, but you can also explore them online. There's a link on the card within the blue folders on your table. We also began hearing conversations about housing taking place in all corners of our community, so we knew that the interest was high. What we were not seeing, however, was a deliberate intersection of those conversations for the purposes of sharing information, ideas, and resources. So that's when we began in earnest planning for this summit over a year ago, and we're thrilled to be sharing this milestone moment with you today. Both Virginia Housing and the Virginia Department of Health have provided generous support and encouragement for this summit, for which we were very grateful. And I'll take care of just a few quick housekeeping items for you. Just so you know, if restroom facilities are down the hall to the right. The Wi-Fi, if you didn't catch it earlier, there's the appropriate Wi-Fi and the password. I'll leave that up on the screen for a few minutes. When you're in there, select guest versus room. There is, for anyone who may need a nursing room or privacy room, we do have a facility here in the hotel. Please see someone with a committee ribbon. There's Tricia back there. see Tricia. And if you are returning tomorrow, please hang on to your name tags and bring them with you. If you can't be with us tomorrow, there's a basket on the check-in table to drop your name tags, which we would appreciate. So before I introduce our facilitators, I'd like to take a moment to return to Jalil's story and the reason why we asked him to open today's gathering. Any discussion about housing can quickly turn to considerations of types of housing to be built, locations, tax credits, public policy, and the like. Those topics represent what we can do and how we can go about it. However, we shouldn't ever lose sight of the reason why we're having these discussions in the first place. Housing is about people. People in our community, our neighbors. And the security and dignity that housing provides for all of us is why we are here today to begin working on this issue together. And we designed the summit agenda to reinforce that foundation. And speaking of the agenda, it's time for me to turn things over to our summit facilitators who come to us from the Spark Mill in Richmond. I'm pleased to introduce to you Chris Bennett and Avi Hopkins, with whom we've enjoyed working for the past several months.
Thanks, Dan. Well, good morning. My name is Chris Bennett, and as Dan said, I am with the Spark Mill. I also can't stand behind a lectern very long. I'm a free-range facilitator. And we are delighted to be with you, and this is a journey. Today is not just intended to be a bunch of sessions where you come and you open your mind and we dump a bunch of content into it. There's meant to be a trajectory, a story that happens today. And we start out by acknowledging the brutal realities of the housing crisis, the housing session. You heard that in Jalil's stories. He shared his story, but it's also tied to hope. Hope that something can be done. We're not going to fix it. We're not going to solve it today. However, we are going to acknowledge the realities on the ground and the possibilities of what we could do as a community. And that's the trajectory that today's conference or today's summit is leading towards. Tomorrow, we will gather back together to start to surface and float up ideas and prioritization of what would it look like for us to come together as a community to address housing in our community so that our neighbors, our friends, people that live with us in our community aren't struggling so mightily to find housing. And as it's a trajectory, I'm going to kick it over to my colleague in the back, Avi Hopkins, who's going to tell us a little something.
Good morning. Good morning. There we go. Good morning. My name is Avi Hopkins, again with the Spark Mill. And as Chris shared, we really are excited about capturing this hope. And as the committee came together to think about how do we memorialize this moment, how do we commemorate this time together, an idea surfaced, one that's fairly unique, and we thought about how to have a live canvas capture our experience today. So the beauty of the conversations today, the questions you ask, the solutions that come out of these conversations will be captured on canvas. So I encourage you to come back on breaks, just see what's happening, and enjoy the work of our artist, who I want to introduce right now, Mr. Amiri Richardson Keys. Amiri Richardson Keys is a native of Richmond, Virginia. He is a husband, father, son, brother, mentor, and entrepreneur. With his wife, he co-founded the Artists Revealed Through Services Preschool and Community Center in Chesterfield, Virginia. Amiri credits his love for the arts and building a circular community to the dynamic Black women and creative role models instrumental in his upbringing. Amiri is a VCU School of Arts graduate and is pursuing a master's degree in art therapy from the George Washington University. Please welcome Amiri Richardson Keys and his work today. And now I'm going to kick it back over to my colleague, Chris.
All right, thanks, Avi. So make sure you're going back there. Another thing I want to point out to you about the space that's slightly different is at your table, you all got some Post-it notes. And that's not only a gift to you from the Community Foundation, it's also intended for you to use along with your Sharpie pen if you feel like it. There are questions, 6 questions around the room that are similar to that are the exact questions we sent out on the survey earlier. If you didn't get a chance to fill that online, check out those questions on the wall and take your Sharpie with your Post-its and put your responses. We're going to use those to source our conversations tomorrow. So check that out during breaks or during lunchtime to be able to do that. And so now I want to turn over to our first presenter, Jonathan Knopf. Jonathan is an executive director for programs at Housing Forward Virginia, where he leads housing research and education efforts across the Commonwealth. So Jonathan, we invite you to come up, and please join me in welcoming Jonathan.
All right, good morning, everybody. Can you hear me? Great. It's great when the lav mic works on the first try. Good job, guys. Well, it's great to be here this morning, and before I get started, I think you should know that I had the chance to go to a number of these housing events, these housing summits, meetings across the state throughout the year, and I think you guys are really in for a treat today. The setup here is great. You've got an awesome team, the committee that has helped put this together, between Dan and Olivia and everybody else he mentioned. And the Spark Mill does a really great job with these sorts of things. So you all are going to have a really good time and I think knock it out of the park. So I'm excited to be here. And it's a tall order to try to start this off. And so what I've been asked to do is explain to you all how we can talk about housing, how we can frame the conversation, and how we can find success instead of failure and frustration, which happens a lot, happens to me a lot too. So I guess raise your hands if you, on a somewhat regular basis, talk about housing in your work, with your neighbors, with your family, and how many of you have had a conversation go somewhere you didn't want it to go with that? So, you know, you can't always avoid getting stuck in the mud, you know, with anything around policy and something as personal as housing, but I will do my best to help kind of give you a larger 10,000-foot view perspective on maybe how to approach talking about this issue and what you can do about it to not get frustrated. So the question that I ask myself all the time and that people ask me is, why is it so hard to talk about housing? What is so unique and special about this thing that we do, this thing that we spend, as I'm sure most of you in this audience spend 40 hours a week, if not more, thinking about and trying to help your community with. So I'm an elder millennial, and as any elder millennial who grew up in the 90s experienced, I got most of my cultural input and knowledge from The Simpsons. So I'm going to have Homer help us kick this off a little bit, because I think he's much better at facial reactions and facial things than I am in expressing his emotions. So the first thing about housing is that there's way too much going on. There are so many policies, so many different types of homes, so many different problems that you don't know where to start. And I think something that we experience is, and this is a cliche, but we really get siloed a lot when we're in the housing world. We focus on homelessness because that's what we're doing on a day-to-day basis. That's our job. Or we're focusing on building, single-family homes or whatever. And so it's easy to kind of get compartmentalized. Or if you're approaching this as an advocate or somebody who just wants to learn more, you don't know where the hell to start, right? It's so hard to figure out where to begin and where to make sense of this huge issue that affects everybody in all of our lives. And as you quickly figure out, a lot of people refuse any reality other than their own. People really often don't think, when they're at least comfortable in their own home and they have stability already, and they've never had to think about somebody who hasn't had the luck and success that they've had and the privilege they've had, it's rare for people to think about housing beyond their own front door. And so that's a challenge that we need to overcome, is to get people to think about housing as this important infrastructure within our community, within our neighborhoods. And as part of that, some people say some things that you wish you could unhear. Unfortunately, as I'm sure folks will talk about throughout the day, a lot of our housing problems are rooted in specific racist actions throughout our American history. And we're still dealing with those and unraveling them and trying to grapple with them and trying to overcome them. And a sordid thread from all of that is that there are unfortunately a lot of people in in this country, around here also, that have biases and have feelings and beliefs that are really opposite from what reality is because of the way that they have been brought up and the certain beliefs that they have. And so it's tough to overcome those if you want to have a civil conversation with people. And so you need to kind of learn where to engage and where to disengage. And so it's really easy to get frustrated at all of this, right? It's easy to retreat and just say, it's not worth it. It's not, I'm not going to go try to talk about, advocate for housing to, my county board of supervisors. They're not going to listen. They're not going to understand. Well, maybe, but actually, I think you'll see that, it's easier than you think it is, and there's more opportunity. There's a window here that we should go down. So, what can we do? And this kind of outlines what I'll be talking about over the next few minutes. And I've got a little timer on my watch, but if we get too far along, just pull the shepherd's hook and take me off the stage. So the first thing is to know your facts and your history. And I think, I'll talk a little bit about some important things that I think are useful to know, but really this is where everybody else speaking later today and tomorrow is going to help you out by giving a lot more, specific information and background on the work that they do and how they've gotten there and how the problems they're looking to solve have been created. I think it's important to know those problems and know how we got there, but a common theme that I want to reiterate is that to be successful about talking about housing, you need to focus on solutions. It's really tough for people, especially when you are introducing them to this concept and trying to convince them that we need to do something. If you dwell too long on the problems, you don't have enough time to talk about what you can do. And that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Is find the solutions and take action and make progress. So be sure to spend time talking about what we can do. And again, I think you will hear throughout today and tomorrow a lot of great work that's already happening and a lot of good ideas that should probably get implemented. And then finally, as you're doing this, you need to rethink how you talk about housing. And so this is what I'll spend a little bit more time on this morning. And then you probably need to think it over again, because I do all the time. It's an iterative learning progress, as you'll quickly find out. So I think the first question that most people ask, and that we spend a lot of time debating and trying to understand, even amongst ourselves as the little housing community of people that do housing work, is what is affordable housing? What isn't affordable housing? And so we have this term that gets used interchangeably by different people in different circumstances in different contexts that sometimes can mean pretty different things. So maybe they're using a very technical definition because it's defined in policy and we're trying to implement a particular program. So, your home is affordable according to the federal government and most housing programs and the way that census treats the housing cost burden data. Your home is affordable if you pay less than 30% of your total household gross income towards your core housing costs, your rent, your mortgage, and your basic utilities. Or maybe you kind of have a programmatic definition. So, regardless of how much you pay for your home, it's affordable if there is a specific subsidy or some sort of assistance making it affordable and making it below whatever the market rate would be. So that is a very specific policy, programmatic type of definition that separates subsidized or assisted housing away from just market rate housing. And then finally, many people, I think, rightfully have a more holistic definition of an affordable home, where it means something that is safe and secure and healthy, and it meets your budget. But it's not just about the money piece, right? It's about that stability and that security, as we, heard about earlier. And so I think it's easy to kind of go down the rabbit hole of talking about what affordable is and isn't. And it's important to have a core definition. But really, housing is a whole spectrum, right? We have this housing ecosystem that all works with each other, and people move between different types of homes, people change their incomes. And so it's this kind of continuous scale that we can think about and then kind of layer on the different solutions we have or the different types of things that we can do to help folks who are experiencing housing problems and housing affordability issues up and down the whole spectrum. And so if we think about that axis in terms of income, using, in this case, area median income, so keeping it somewhat relative. And I know it's probably very small to see for the people in the back, so I apologize. But over on the left here, we're going to start with types of housing solutions or things within the housing spectrum that help people with very little ability to pay or who are experiencing housing instability. And so that includes things like our temporary shelters, transitional housing, permanent supportive housing, deep rental assistance, and I'll talk about kind of what that is and how, what kind of is included in that. But those are all generally things that are supported by public money and or private philanthropy. So there is some sort of specific subsidy or assistance going into those because the market is not going to provide that on their own, really regardless of market conditions. But then for people who do have some ability to pay for housing, the market can provide for those. But unfortunately, a lot of those options in the market for people with the least ability to pay, they have to make a sacrifice on. The home is lesser quality and further away from their jobs. There's a reason it doesn't cost as much, right? There's a reason it's cheaper. And really, in reality, most people who have very or extremely low incomes are living in market rate housing, and they are spending way too much of their income on their home. We do not have enough of this stuff over here to meet the need that is out there across the whole United States. But once we get a little further up, we do have the market and public subsidies, public assistance working together. But generally, it is the private market fulfilling the housing needs of most people, for better or for worse. And then once you reach kind of 80% AMI or around median income, then folks usually have a little more choice in which home they want to live in, at least if you're not in Northern Virginia or New York or something. And so this is where we can start talking about first-time home ownership and looking at maybe new construction rentals, things that are serving a slightly higher income or moderate income buyer. And so you can see how the ways that the market provides housing and the way that we as policymakers and housing providers can supplement what the market is doing. And I'll leave it to the presenters later today to talk about kind of where those specific gaps and failures are. Mel's going to talk to you a lot about what the data shows, and then I think the people who are actually doing the work will explain kind of where that is, where the rubber is meeting the road there. So real quickly, kind of how those things work, which I think is important to know, at least here in Virginia. If we look at just the homelessness and supportive housing world, so helping people that have housing instability, generally the flow of money, the flow of resources here is we have federal and state grants and philanthropy, private money, going through either local governments or our state housing agency, DHCD, into continuums of care, local planning groups, the actual local providers, coordinating and doing a lot of this work. And that goes into shelter, supportive housing, people who are doing other services. And so we have a lot of, you kind of see, federalism happen here. You have a lot of money from the federal government, the state government as well, all kind of flowing through the system. So there's a lot of players here in order to make this work. And you can kind of see the people who have the purse strings actually can dictate how much and what we can do. On the deep rental assistance side, so housing that isn't necessarily for people that have any other issues beyond just they can't afford a home because they're have very low incomes or can't work or whatever. This is, again, stuff that is generally funded almost entirely by our federal government because they have the money to do this. They have the money generally that can reach the need that is there for these households, but it's woefully under what it needs to be to meet the need for everybody. So we have public housing, which I'll talk about in a second, kind of the trajectory there, and then really the more common way that we address and try to help folks with deep rental assistance is through housing choice vouchers, where we provide people a voucher to go find a home on the open market, and then we can subsidize their rent through the voucher. 1 in 4, if not fewer, of people who are eligible for vouchers and need one actually get them. So that's kind of a recurring theme. Our State Housing Finance Agency, Virginia Housing, helps administer vouchers for really kind of non-urban areas, so for most of the state, through local voucher administrators, but vouchers are also administered through public housing authorities, where we have those across the state. And then finally, just kind of in the more kind of traditional affordable rental development, so things that are getting built by nonprofit developers and private developers, where there are some below market rate units being provided. Today, that is almost entirely thanks to something called the Low-Income Housing Tax Credit. And that's been the case since the 80s. The federal government has shifted the role to providing affordable rentals onto nonprofit and for-profit developers using this tax credit system. And we can supplement that through, again, other state funds, local funds, sometimes philanthropy to help deals actually get done. Again, our Virginia Housing plays an important role here in allocating those tax credits out across the state. And this goes to developers who are working in a community to actually build housing. And so this is the flow of how new affordable rental housing gets built. And again, it's woefully well below what the need actually is. And so to kind of give a little bit of context for those systems there, I'm going to show you 3 charts that just in general at a very high level, I think help explain some of the problems that we're facing today. And then Mel will spend more time talking about specifically what's happening here in this region. So first, we really don't build them like we used to. And this is not commentary on the type of home or what we're building it out of, but we're just not building enough at the rate that we used to. So this graph goes back to the 1960s, and you can see this is the rate of production per the share of population across the whole country. And we are over here now in 2022, 2023, about half of what that average was back in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. And so you can see the big dip from the Great Recession when housing production cratered, and we are just barely crawling our way out of it. If you think there are a lot of homes getting built and you smack your head and you're like, I can't believe all the homes they're putting up these days, that is nothing compared to what we used to do a few generations ago. And so we are well behind the production and supply that we need to build across the whole spectrum of housing. But looking at the federal government's role in all of this, this chart shows the annual outlays in the federal government's funding for public housing and deep rental assistance. And so again, it's kind of tough to see, especially if you're further in the back. But basically what this shows here, again, looking from around 1960 to today, the yellow there is kind of what this big brown chunk up here shows is funding dedicated to public housing, so units that are built and provided by the government, by the federal government, and then operated and managed by local public housing authorities. Those are affordable in perpetuity, but we'll get there, different story. But you can see all this blue is over here are vouchers. So in the 90s, the federal government, and really beginning in the 80s and in the 90s, the federal government transitioned its priority for funding away from building and maintaining units to providing folks with vouchers and telling them, go find a home in the private market and we'll help pay for it. But the problem is we're not building enough homes for those people to find. And so we have this really broken system where we're putting money out and telling people good luck, but we're not providing the homes that they need that could be affordable to them or they could even find in the first place. And so what's happened is that the federal government has said, well, okay, we're going to get out of the business of building housing ourselves. We're not going to do public housing anymore. And so we're going to ask the private market to help us with that. And so that's where the low-income housing tax credit comes in. And so this is what that production has looked like since the mid-'80s when the program began. And you can see production really go well above 60, 70, 80,000 units a year in the early 2000s when we were building a lot relative to decades ago. But that production has tanked after the Great Recession, and we're, again, still barely crawling back to where we need to be. And so we are so far behind where we actually need to be right now. And that's a really tough position to be in because we have so much that we need to do to overcome before we can even think about the next generation and our future. So, of course, this doesn't even mention all these things like rising interest rates, labor and material costs skyrocketing, restrictive land use policies, that's a whole separate thing that I don't have time to get into, but maybe we'll talk about later. Wages lagging behind what the price of housing has done, workforce shortages that are preventing us from building homes, and private equity stepping into the game and acquiring single-family homes, mobile home parks in concentrated areas and really disrupting markets in a lot of ways that make it tough to find stable and affordable housing. So, where does this leave us? What happens? I think the takeaways are accelerating prices reflect the lack of supply across the whole spectrum. So it's across the board. We need more of everything. And these long-term shifts in federal policy, what they do is put increased responsibility and burden on state governments, local governments, service providers, private market, everybody. And so now that responsibility is diluted across a lot of different actors within the system. And so we have to coordinate more and do a lot more with less. And so, again, it's hard to plan for the future. It's hard to think about what we're going to do, how we're going to take care of housing for, our kids and their kids when we're still trying to find homes on our own, right? We are not even treading water yet. We're still underwater. So, what do we do? This is tough. This is depressing because a broken housing market makes things tough for everybody. Even folks that are relatively comfortable in their own home, their life is disrupted in some way if the housing market around them is broken because they're the folks that bag their groceries and provide other services for them. The people that earn less are making sacrifices, and so we just have this very inefficient economic system that gets created when our housing market isn't working. So what can we do? The two ways that I like to separate this in just kind of economic terms are supply-side solutions and demand-side solutions. And so what does that mean? What does that look like? So on the supply side, we can make affordable housing. So we can think about actual units by reforming zoning to help the private market build more. We can provide more subsidies to do development. We can do mixed income housing. We can do project-based assistance that are attached to specific units. But we can also make the existing housing that is out there more affordable. So provide more assistance to tenants and renters themselves. Give it to the people and don't attach it to the home. That's what vouchers do. We can provide grants and other loans to first-time home buyers to help them purchase their first home. We can do home repair assistance, weatherization, other things to help folks' homes be more weatherized and energy efficient and lower their heating and cooling costs. And we can, this is not a specific housing policy, but we can increase wages and help folks afford housing more generally. But if you only do one of these, then it doesn't really solve the whole problem. And because of the lack of supply that we have, I would argue that we really need to be prioritizing a lot of stuff on this left column, because if you juice up the stuff over here, it's only going to make the supply problem worse and make costs go up further. So it's really all of the above, but probably prioritize over here on the left-hand side. So, of course, no wonder this is hard to talk about. This is a lot that you need to take in and a lot that you probably need to understand in order to have some sort of useful conversation with somebody who doesn't know anything and has never thought about housing before. So it's hard because housing is personal. We all live in a home if we're lucky enough. We all need a home at least, and so we have personal attachment to those homes, and good reason, right? That's the place where we spend at least a third of our lives, if not more. It's the place where we raise our kids, go to sleep at night, so it means a lot to us. And surprisingly, something that I found, at least around Virginia at the local regional level, is that housing really isn't partisan. It's one of the few things that hasn't been completely poisoned by the rest of the political discourse, but usually, more often than not, it's not partisan, and so this gives us some interesting opportunities. But still, housing breaks people's brains, and I think a really good example of this that I found earlier this year is when Arlington County was thinking about changing their zoning ordinance to allow for what they called missing middle housing, so small-scale apartments, duplexes, 3 to 4 unit, small apartment buildings within traditionally single-family neighborhoods. And so this was, as you might expect, a very divisive, controversial thing that really isn't going to have that much of an impact at the end of the day. I think they're expecting, or even capped the permits on it once they passed it to 50 a year to begin with. So it's really not going to have an effect. But it was still a pretty important win. But during the discourse and during the debate and everything, we saw some interesting things like this. And so I came across this, this post on Twitter earlier this year where a housing advocate in Arlington posted this picture. And he said, I walked through my neighborhood here in Arlington, shows some interesting contradictory thoughts on missing middle housing. And so we'll zoom in here on what these yard signs are. And so on the left, we've got a sign that you've probably seen a lot throughout cities in Virginia over the past few years. We believe Black Lives Matter, love is love, no human is illegal. So you might expect the person living in this home to have some relatively progressive values, and you would think, okay, maybe they understand that, housing is a human right, housing is critical, for stability, and we want to support that within our neighborhood. Well, no, you're wrong. They don't want any upzoning, no duplexes, do not ruin the character of this beautiful, $1 million+, single family home community by building a duplex next to me. I do not want that here. So, Black Lives Matter, but just they need to matter over there, right? And so it's this cognitive dissonance that occurs with housing that doesn't really occur, at least from my perspective, in a lot of different areas, or maybe I'm just naive about that. But what's going on here? And so I think, this is a little bit of pop psychology. I'm not a psychologist, so this might have been debunked, but you might have heard of something called the Dunning-Kruger effect. So this means basically, we have our level of confidence that somebody may have on the y-axis and the level of competence they have on the x-axis. And so, if you know nothing, you probably have zero confidence. But if you learn a little bit, then all of a sudden you've got a lot of confidence, and you find yourself on the top of what they call Mount Stupid. But then you learn a little bit more, and so this was, me a few years ago. You end up in the valley of despair because you get overwhelmed with how much information is out there, and you realize you don't really know anything. There's so much more to learn, but eventually you begin going up the slope of enlightenment to the plateau of sustainability, and you know that you know a lot and can actually explain things. But unfortunately for us, everybody really thinks they're an expert, and most public meeting attendees are usually, very confidently at the top of Mount Stupid, and are not going to come down from there. So that's, I don't mean all public meeting attendees. I'm sure many of you go to public meetings, as you should, but unfortunately that is a stereotype, right? And that is what I'm sure a lot of you have experienced. So let's talk about frames and backfires, these two terms that you may have heard of before. What is a frame, and why are we talking about it? What does this mean in the context of talking about housing? Well, frames are the choices that we use to define kind of how we're going to set a conversation and how we're going to present information. And so to be effective, where are you going to start that conversation? What values or what knowledge are you going to begin that discussion on? It requires to know your audience. You can't just use the same message with everybody. You need to know what to lead with to not have people shut down immediately. You need to use your words carefully a lot of the time because words are loaded. Words have lots of different meaning and definitions to people, so you have to recognize that. And this is the problem I have for the most part, is knowing what not to say. What do you leave unsaid? What do you strategically leave out sometimes? And so those are the things that you need to think about when you're framing a conversation. And this goes for housing, but also goes for trying to plan dinner with your partner, right? Which can sometimes devolve into an argument over where are you going to go, where are you going to cook, and so knowing how to frame those conversations is something that you learn naturally, but maybe just isn't something that you think about doing proactively when you're talking about housing. And so if you don't choose the right frame and you don't approach these discussions strategically, at least with strangers or people that you don't really know that well, your message can backfire. And this happens a lot, right? You see it in every, political discussion, every conversation about something serious these days, where the receiver of that message will just immediately shut down and retreat back into what they feel comfortable with, which is a lot of times their existing prejudice or biases. And you're not going to get anywhere. They have thrown up the brick wall, and they are now on the defensive because you might have said something that they perceived as an insult, or making them appear that they didn't know something, and so now they think that you're calling them stupid. And so it's tough, right, when you find yourself in that situation, because now anything you say is going to be counterproductive. And so and we're guilty of this too, right? The human brain is wired this way. We're still trying to solve that evolutionarily, I think. So maybe we'll get there in a few thousand years. But for today, we still have to overcome it. So an example of how a backfire may work in real life is, a lot of you, housing service providers, nonprofit people, you've got to do an annual report, an annual appeal. And so you want to, take your clients that you've been able to help and, maybe tell their story. And show to your funders, like, hey, look at these people that we're helping. Or maybe you want to take this message into the community, and so you say, hey, John and Mary are our neighbors, they need our help. They have an addiction problem, they've been homeless, they need an affordable home, and they need some counseling support. And so, we can help provide them that, and so help us do that. Well, if you are taking that to somebody who isn't kind of familiar with what you do and familiar with the systems and all of the different policy decisions over the past few generations that have led to John and Mary having those problems, you have people retreating into their own frame of personal responsibility, and they'll say, well, they just need to stop making bad decisions. That's their fault. Don't ask me to pay for their mistakes. Or a lot of times, this is very common, zero-sum thinking across, across our economy and our society. So, I might feel bad for them, but it's got nothing to do with me. And, if we help them, then other people are sacrificing something else, and they just need to pull themselves up by their bootstraps. And, again, not my problem, not going to think about it. And this is pretty common, right? Those are backfires that I think a lot of you have probably experienced in your work and talking about, housing. And so there is a lot of great, interesting research on this that's still ongoing. I'm happy to share resources at the end and provide links and all the follow-up material. But if you're scribbling notes or Googling on your phone, look for the Frameworks Institute, Enterprise Community Partners. They are the national organizations that have done this research and done focus groups and done surveys to test different messaging strategies and test how to have conversations about housing from an empirical perspective to be successful. And so we need to learn from that research to do our jobs better and be more effective. So just condensing all of this down very briefly, 4 tips I think that we can pick up from their research are, number 1, focus on regional fairness. And so that's why it's great. This is a regional conversation that you all are having here today. So we need to move the discussion away from personal decision making to how these issues, even if they are at a household level, are affecting our whole community, and how the benefits by investing in housing proactively, helping folks find a stable home, that has ripple effects on the rest of us and the rest of our community to be successful. Number 2, focus on systems. Don't focus on particular persons all the time or particular individual stories. It helps people to know how we got here in the first place. And in order to do that, they need to know the characters and what their roles are. What role does the federal government play? What do they not play anymore? What are they not doing? That's important to know. What do nonprofits in our community do? What does the local government do, not do? What strings can, what levers can they pull? What do they not have access to? So understanding those limitations helps set the stage for a more informative and productive conversation. And so that also helps you do number 3, which is provide proactive explanations. Don't assume people know everything you do. You need to fill blanks yourself, because if you don't fill blanks, then people are going to fill them with their own information and their own ideas, and who knows where they're getting them from, right? There's all sorts of stuff on Facebook now that is totally wrong. And so, you need to help inject, reality and, real situations, real data into your stories. And that's where data comes into play. But then I think most importantly, focus on solutions. Never end the conversation by saying, yeah, it's a huge problem. Right? What does that encourage somebody to do? Nothing. You need to always end on, well, here's what we're already doing about it, and here's what we need to do more of, and here's how you can help, right? That actually will activate somebody to say, okay, this is solvable. This is something that we can take on. It's not, rocket science. So we are, I looked it up, 43 days away from Thanksgiving, and so this will be your ultimate test. The time is ticking. Are you ready? Are you ready for wherever the conversation may go, depending on where your cousin or your uncle may take it? They take it all sorts of places, especially once you're halfway through dinner and the tryptophan is hitting, the wine is there, and so Lord knows what's going to go on. So if housing gets brought up, are you ready? And so my tips to you would be use familiar places, terms, and concepts. Focus on things your uncle or your cousin or whoever is familiar with. Talk about their own situation. Talk about, well, hey, when you bought your home back in the 80s, how much was it? And how much did you make? And how does that compare to now, right? What privileges and advantages did you have that maybe you didn't think of? And now, what's actually happening today? What's changed? What's different? Again, name the players and their roles in the system. Don't treat this as some big nebulous thing that's occurring that we're left holding the bag for. This is, there are people making these decisions, have made these decisions in generations past, and so you can connect those. So this is where it's really important to know your American history around housing, around redlining, around urban renewal, around predatory lending, all of those things that unfortunately got us to where we are today, and to draw those paths and those connections. And despite me being a data person, just like Mel, that's the world that we are confident in speaking and talking about. We love numbers. That helps us do our jobs. You all shouldn't use data as the full dish. It is an important ingredient, but you need to be telling a story. Don't lead with data, because people are going to have their own facts and their own numbers that they might be wrong, they might be right in a certain context, but you need to use those strategically to support your overall message and the takeaways that you have. So find the right stat, find the right data that helps you, but only in the context of telling your story. Don't just dump a bunch of numbers at people. And finally, again, connect to the larger problems that your community and your region overall might be facing. So I think maybe the best example of that, or one of the best examples, is economic development. So something that we've heard a lot of over the past few years from people who do economic development work and try to bring in jobs and employers into regions is, well, this company wants to move here, but now all of a sudden they're telling me we don't have any homes to put their workers in, and now they need to go somewhere else. And so we're not going to have, we're not going to grow our tax base, we're not going to grow our economy if we don't build homes for the workers that we need, in addition to the people already living here that need homes. And so, for somebody who might be more receptive to, the overall, economic vibrancy, argument and, economic development, housing is very easy to connect to that now, unfortunately. And so, try to connect it to these bigger issues within our region that can maybe resonate with people more, especially if they've never really thought about housing in the past for any reason. So I think I'll end on a couple things I think you should keep in mind as you hear all the other experts and great people talk for the rest of today and tomorrow also. Number one, affordable really is just the start of the conversation. It's very easy, and I see it very commonly, where groups of people just like you all will just spin in circles talking about what affordable is and isn't, right? It's important to understand what that means, what it doesn't mean, and how it can mean different things in different contexts. But don't get stuck, in that loop. Have an idea of what you want affordable to be, and then spend more time talking about how to actually get there. Take advantage of increasing attention on housing issues. Housing, for better or for worse, is something that policymakers are hearing a lot more about and are more hungry for solutions on, because their constituents are telling them that there's issues, their local staff are telling them that we need to fix our housing problems, and so the Overton window has shifted, and there's an opportunity to do a lot more now, to get more resources, to change policies that have been broken. So now is the time, and let's build on this momentum. There is a lot of great stuff already happening. We are making progress in a lot of different ways. And I hope that's a story, or a thread that you'll hear, all the way through tomorrow, because it's really good to build on success. It encourages you and encourages other people to join what you do. But we're here talking about this because there is so much more to do. We have an uphill battle, but we are moving full steam ahead, and so we just need to keep up the work and bring more people along with us. So good luck today and tomorrow and at Thanksgiving. I am here to help. Our organization is here to help. If you haven't heard of Housing Forward, please check us out. Look us up on all the different social media things. I think we try to stay active there. So use us as a resource, and if we do have time, I'm happy to take some questions, or I'm also happy to just keep things going.
First off, thanks for bridging the generational gap by introducing The Simpsons.
Yep.
As a Gen Xer, I appreciate that so much. Fantastic information. We do want to open up, we got a couple minutes for questions. We are running a bit behind, so we're going to kind of condense the question and answer. But Jonathan, hopefully you're here all day and people can connect with you on a break or at lunch. Are there any burning questions that you may have for Jonathan while we still have him? Avi's got the mic and he'll run to you if you have a question. Oh, question, of course, on the other side of the room. Avi's fast.
It's always the other side of the room.
It always.
Thank you for that wonderful talk. Early, as you made the case for why housing has these sort of critical shortages, I was tracking, I think, as you were talking about the building graph and how that fit with our population. In our community, we have an aging population, so we see emptying of existing stock. And I just wondered, in this case scenario, how does this repurposing of existing housing factor into looking at housing shortages and the need for new housing versus strategies for revitalization of old housing?
That's a great question, right? Because I think another trend that I did not speak on, but Mel, you will probably touch on a little bit, is how our overall demographics for the past few generations and where we are today are very different than what they might have been when those homes for those seniors were being built. So, think about your 3 and 4 bedroom homes that all of a sudden have a lot of empty bedrooms because those children who grow up in them are now adults, and they have, for the most part, now moved out. Although for my generation, that's been delayed because of these housing issues, the student loans and all sorts of other stuff, right? We got the worst timing possible. And so that's an issue that we need to solve. We need more housing overall. We need it to meet the needs of those people who want to downsize out of those homes, but also are, the millennials and the people that might need smaller homes or just prefer smaller homes. And so what do we do with all those empty bedrooms? And that's a challenge. I think, there are some strategies to address that, but it's tough to kind of social engineer moving the, households of different sizes to the homes that they might, everything else held equal, might work best for them, because those larger 4-bedroom homes might be way further away from where those people are actually working or where they want to live because of our development patterns over the past few decades. So there is no easy answer to that question, but it is absolutely something that we think about and try to address and develop strategies for, because we need more, but there's also lots of homes out there already that we need to take care of and be a good steward for into the future to make sure they continue to serve households for further generations.
We have time for one more question, if there's a burning question. Right there.
Just a general question for you and all of the presenters. As we prepare to take these conversations out to our communities, our constituencies, our neighbors, Will you be sharing your PowerPoints?
Yes, so
Thank you.
should have been upfront about that, but I have a feeling that the folks know what they're doing here, and they will be sharing all the slides from today, from not just me, but from everybody else in a follow-up email and on the website, I'm sure. So you will be taken care of, and you can always email me, just Google my name, you'll find me, and I can send you that and whatever else you might want that could be helpful.
Awesome. Great. Jonathan, thank you so much. Wonderful, everybody. Thank you.
We work in the Stanton, Augusta, and Waynesboro area, providing what we call critical home repairs that make a home safe, warm, dry, and accessible. Typically, we work with folks that are residing in a home that they own or are in the process of purchasing, making sure they had a front door that locked and the windows that were intact and locked. Their floors aren't falling through to the basement, making sure they have insulation, that their furnace works. A lot of those things, though, we as a volunteer organization aren't going to be the direct providers of, but we're making connections with folks whose primary mission is to look at furnaces and air conditioning units and insulation. So we work with Department of Social Services on those things, as well as community housing partners. Dry oftentimes involve roofing problems, plumbing, get a lot of leaky pipes and toilets that are leaking around the base that then lead to other problems with floor rotting. Accessible is anything from wheelchair ramps and grab bars to pulling out tubs and replacing them with low threshold showers. A lot of those more involved bathroom modifications, we're working with Valley Program of Aging Services, helping us cover some of the costs of that larger project. They'd been living in this home renting for 18 years, and the landlord had a sudden need to house a family member, so they were kind of forced into a situation. We got a call from a friend of theirs who explained the dire situation to us. The home that they've bought is basically a shell. They have no utilities, they have no electricity, no water, no septic or sewer system hookup, no power, basically an aluminum shell. Roof you could see through. There were missing shingles. Inside walls were just paneled over with scraps of wood that they had found. They certainly met all the income criteria, the home ownership criteria, the critical needs for sure. It was going to be a leap of faith on our organization's part to take on this project because we still had 50 other people that we already had approved projects that we needed to continue making headway on. But we really felt like this couple was in a really bad place, but they were holding their heads up and they were trying to make the best of it, looking for resources with their friends and tapping into things, and were actively engaged in making it work where they could have just been very despondent in that situation. When this family moved into this, they had to try to make it somewhat secure and I don't even want to say comfortable, but livable. So they did some work to put locks on the door and put boards up over the windows and on patch some of the walls that had holes in them, and hung blankets up over windows to try to keep it warm. And they didn't have any plumbing, so one of the first things that we did was rented a porta-john for them to have on site. And then we started talking with them about kind of the steps that they had already taken. They had already gotten permits for the building, the electrical, the mechanical, but they had not made contact with Shenandoah Valley Electric to run the power from the main line. They didn't have a meter base, so those were some of the first things that we had to start getting in motion. A volunteer who had experience with roofing pulled together along with some of our volunteers to tear the old shingle roof off and replace with new shingle roofing so that they were protected from the elements. Because they had moved all of their belongings along with things that they had salvaged from other homes and other locations that they had access to, with items that, counters and commodes, sinks and light switches, anything so that they could have materials to refurbish this tin can, which really has helped us as an organization not to have to buy all those things. Some of them work, some of them don't. Some of them we can make work by reworking the framing of the house. But then also all of that that stuff we had to get out of there because we couldn't start tearing the ceiling down to run the electrical, tearing the wallboard off to run the plumbing. So we purchased a large tent shelter for them, and we had a group of youth from a church in Kentucky came one weekend, and they carted out carton after carton, garbage bag after garbage bag out to this tent of all these people's personal belongings. The homeowners were there saying, okay, we want to save that, that can go into the dumpster, and just kind of cleaning out so we could have a clean palette to start working on. And in the process of that too, they had to relocate 20 plus cats. They were all in crates, so she was able to find people within her nonprofit organization to house them. That same youth group helped build a new front porch and steps because we wanted them to have at least one safe access point. We replaced the door, and we've started putting in some of the windows that they had collected. The ceiling has all been cleaned out. Power company had come in, trenched, run the power, put in the meter base, so they now have power. We're working on getting estimates for plumbing to get run in. The cistern has been cleaned, the water pump and pressure tank are purchased, ready to hook up. So we're hoping in the next couple months to get them under roof, secure with windows and doors, the plumbing hooked up so that we can get the commode set and they can start using inside plumbing instead of the porta-john. And then we can start doing, using volunteer crews to do the interior work, building the interior walls back, putting up insulation, putting in drywall, putting in the cabinets, just building the home on the inside once we have it structurally sound. I think knowing how limited the affordable housing market is, it really makes us really understand the importance of the work that we're doing so that not another family is facing that situation of trying to find housing that they can afford. This family was faced with losing their housing that they'd been comfortable in for almost 20 years and had to make some tough choices. But they are working with us, and we're seeing them seeing their shoulders lift a little bit, lighten the load as we accomplish one task after the other. That's a very rewarding situation for all of us, the donors that have contributed funds to that project as well as our other projects. I think when we get them all tucked in for the winter, hopefully, that they're going to be so grateful. They already have been grateful, and hopefully we can have a nice grand opening for them to celebrate their new home.